Hey, it's Matt Robison, and here's our latest episode of Political Rehab, our mashup of PTI meets The Daily Show, where a Republican and a Democrat try our best to have a good time with the week's news. I'm live with you right now, but the rest of this episode was previously recorded. Here we go.
Honestly, it's an impeachable offense. It'll never happen, but it's wrong.
Arguably, the most shocking thing anyone in this administration has done yet that could be a political extinction level event.
It's okay to have disagreements, but there needs to be accountability.
A lot of countries are sending low-level observers to keep an eye on things, kind of like the witnesses present for the big vampire fight at the end of the Twilight series. Welcome to Political Rehab, smart politics without the hangover. I'm Matt.
And I'm Matt.
Today, our first cabinet firing, CBS entering crisis mode, a shutdown shrug, a SOTU circus, and war looming. But let's start, as always, with our Trump dump.
Time for the Trump dump.
That's right. It's time for the Trump dump, because it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. There's something Trump did this week that pissed you off.
And as we record this, Donald Trump's new Board of Peace, not to be confused with the Department of War, is meeting in Washington, D.C. And it's really hard to keep track of all the irony involved. First, the meeting is being held at the so-called Donald J. Trump U.S. Institute for Peace. This is a building and an institution that Trump forcibly seized in a Doge operation last year. Picture like a Mission Impossible plot if the Impossible Missions Force were staffed by total incompetent morons who tried to break in the most laughable way. A federal judge actually ruled against the administration, and that ruling is still on appeal, meaning the whole building is in a legal limbo and is essentially under illegal occupation by the forces of Donald Trump. Really, you can't make this stuff up. Second, Trump is gathering this meeting together to discuss peace in the Middle East as he's massing overwhelming forces in the Middle East to go to war, including sending the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest warship ever built, to be ready to strike Iran. It's the biggest air power military buildup in the Middle East since Iraq in 2003. Seems pretty peaceful. Third, none of her allies among the big democracies want to be part of this. Great Britain, Japan, Canada, Australia, France, Germany, Italy, they all said this is a very obvious scam and we want nothing to do with it, so fuck off. Even noted war enthusiast, the Pope, said no. Trump responded by saying, yeah, well, if this is such a scam, then how come I'm charging countries $1 billion apiece to get scam club memberships? Where does that money go, by the way? No idea. I have some guesses. Instead, the seats at the Board of Peace will be filled by plenty of autocracies, dictatorships, and nations accused of human rights abuses, according to Politico. A lot of countries are sending low-level observers to keep an eye on things, kind of like the witnesses present for the big vampire fight at the end of the Twilight series. And finally, the so-called peace plan that's on the table is Jared Kushner's Rebuild Gaza real estate deal, which seems like an awesome moneymaker for the Trump family and not exactly an actual international development plan or sustainable political solution for the suffering people in Gaza. Look, if people want to criticize the United Nations for being a mess, go for it. You're not wrong. If people want to point out that the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, had at least a dozen employees allegedly involved in the October 7th Hamas terror attack on Israel, and so maybe the UN is not the proper agency to be involved in a peace or rebuilding plan, that is more than fair. But make no mistake, the Board of Peace is not really a board, and it's not really about peace. It has every appearance of being a sham, money-making opportunity built on the backs of some of the most vulnerable people on earth.
I picked this week's Trump dump because I can't believe this made it out of the Signal chat. And you know what I'm talking about. The video promoting MAHA featuring RFK Jr. and Kid Rock shirtless, in jeans, in a gym. This thing goes on for a minute and a half. At the end, they're now playing pickleball. Some strategist saw this footage and said, "This is gold, Jerry. This is gold. This changes everything. Post it everywhere." Now, clearly, I'm not someone who spends a lot of time in the gym. And I can tell you that there's nothing in this video that made me want to start. But here's the question I always ask. Who's this for? Is there a persuadable suburban mom crosstab where shirtless RFK Jr. and Kid Rock flexing moves a swing district? Is there a single independent voter watching this thinking, you know what? I was worried about affordability, jobs, the war in Iran, the Epstein files, but now I am back on board the MAGA train. Look, I understand it was meant to be playful, maybe even ironic. It was clearly has people talking about exercise and diet. But why do we have to be so damn weird? I mean, this is Dukakis in a tank weird. This is Tom Cruise jumping on Oprah's couch weird. And people don't vote for weird. Is this going to be the biggest issue of the midterms? Of course not. Am I making a big deal out of this? Probably. But politics is death by 1,000 cuts. We beat our opponents not by one big blow, but by many small injuries that accumulate over time. Each cut might seem insignificant on its own, but together they create a narrative that reinforces what already exists. Americans already don't trust RFK Jr. Many people already feel this administration is not serious. In less than 9 months, voters are going to deliver their verdict on Donald Trump. The president's approval rating is underwater. Trust in institutions is fragile. This video reinforces the clown show that people already associate with the Trump administration. Republicans already have an uphill climb. We're going to lose the House. The Senate's going to be close. And the worst part, this is all self-inflicted. Go ahead and do a video, but let's not be weird. Make it something voters won't cringe over, because you don't get many more cuts before you just bleed out.
Well, I personally loved it. And speaking of it being time to rock out with your cock out, let's get to our rundown. First up, Kristi Noem on thin ice. She is at the center of multiple controversies beginning to swirl around her at once. Allegations that she imperiled a military service member's life in order to keep deportation flights on schedule. Her top DHS spokesperson, Tricia McLaughlin, leaving after becoming a public face of lies around ICE operations, and revelations that DHS has been using subpoenas to unmask free speech anti-ICE critics. The question for you, Matt, is all of this stacking up toward a Noem departure, leaving to spend more time with family and her string of dog corpses?
Yes. And first of all, it has to. As I mentioned before, she has taken the strongest issue that Republicans have had in a generation, immigration, and made it toxic. She has failed at her job. And Republicans already have a problem with swing voters, largely because of what she's been doing. They need a big, huge reset. I wrote this week on The Apprentice, when someone botched an assignment, Trump brought them into a boardroom. I say maybe it's time for one more episode. Put Noem in a chair, put Bondi in a chair, let him fight for the job, and let Trump say the words that made him famous. You're fired.
The most politically visible story that's come out so far is the departure of the spokesperson. You do sometimes see this kind of thing. First, the communications people leave, and then the higher ups tend to leave. But the most shocking story in all of this is the decision that NBC reported on in great detail. There was an incident where a 23-year-old military service member, a Coast Guardsman, went overboard. There was a search underway to try to save this young American military member's life. And Kristi Noem tried to divert a Coast Guard C-130 plane from being part of the search and rescue operation in order to use it for a deportation flight so that they wouldn't be put just a tiny bit off schedule. This is such an unconscionable slap in the face to her responsibilities as a Secretary of Homeland Security, to our military. It's such a political blunder. You just can't imagine anyone in any previous administration surviving something like this, or even coming close to it. We've seen this with the drawdown of forces in Minnesota. A little bit of time was allowed to elapse so that they could save a little bit of face. But to me, the writing is on the wall. And I agree with you that If it is not, if they have not made plans already to find a way to kick her to the curb, then they are committing political malpractice, and she needs to go.
She absolutely does. Real quick, what's the time frame?
It'll be by the spring. I would say by May, enough time for it to kind of diminish as a story before the midterms.
We also had a couple stories about CBS being in crisis. Now, there's the big story out there. Stephen Colbert was told by CBS Networks that they couldn't air an interview with James Tallarico on The Late Show. The FCC says there's no censorship, but CBS blocked the interview. But there's also another story out there. Anderson Cooper said he's going to leave 60 Minutes, turned down an offer to renew his deal with CBS. It feels like this is a network that's just completely coming apart. Matt, what do you make of all this?
There's another dog that hasn't barked quite as loudly in this story, which is that Warner Brothers Discovery has officially reopened deal talks with Paramount Skydance following a sweetened hostile takeover bid. The WBD, the Warner Brothers Discovery board, you have to glom together a lot of corporate names these days because they've all engaged in mergers, which lo and behold, the FCC has some jurisdiction over. Funny how that works. The Warner Brothers board has granted Paramount a 7-day window ending February 23rd to present its best and final offer to compete with the existing merger agreement from Netflix. Funny how that dot seems to connect to a flurry of activity from CBS. Oh, look, we've suddenly found reason to reinterpret a decades and decades old rule here to try to go after Colbert again. It's more making nice with Brendan Carr, this mafia figure, and the administration while they're under the microscope and trying to win this deal. That's what's going on here. If anyone out there is thinking, well, it seems like maybe this is fuzzy, maybe the FCC has a point here, maybe Colbert went a little overboard, I want to assure you that we are going to deal with this in detail in our That's Bullshit segment. So I hope people will hang on for that. In the meantime, let's shift gears again and talk a little bit about the shutdown that didn't bark. Did you know that the government is partially shut down right now? I mean, if you're watching this show, you're extremely intelligent and good looking, I'd like to add. And so clearly you know this, but I would wager that the vast majority of the American public is not aware that the government is in a partial shutdown right now, centered on the Department of Homeland Security. The country is barely noticing. This is still centering on the ICE oversight and reform that Democrats have put forward and that Republicans have refused to consider. By the way, just reaching back to our previous segment on this, Matt, like, I don't understand. They're trying to crab walk away from this whole ICE story. And Kristi Noem committed what's arguably the most shocking thing anyone in this administration has done yet, that could be a political extinction level event, imperiling the life of a U.S. service member in order to keep a deportation flight on schedule. And yet they will not back down on this funding fight. Why is there a shrug over this? And why are we still stuck in this?
It really points to a couple of things. What the Democrats want, I think most Americans would agree with. But it also goes to show, I think, how ineffective Democrats are on presenting this message. Because I think in more capable hands, Nancy Pelosi, who, again, everybody knows I do not like Nancy Pelosi or agree with Nancy Pelosi. But I think Nancy Pelosi would have been able to make this an interesting day in and day out conversation, even in the era of Trump, even with the Epstein stuff, even with former Prince Andrew getting arrested, even with all the clutter that's out there. The fact that the Democrats can't take an issue that I think most Americans agree with and be able to make it news really gives me a little bit of hope that maybe Republicans don't get our asses kicked that badly. But I also think it's such a small shutdown that maybe will rear its head during the State of the Union next week, that just nobody cares. It's a Chiron graphic at best.
Right. And it hasn't started to bite people, really.
Right.
Like, we're only one disaster away from really needing some FEMA funding. And I think Democrats can be a little bit forgiven for being a little slow to update their priors, because this has been an issue that they played defense on for so long that it's hard. I mean, we've debated on this show ourselves, like, is it time for them to pivot on it? But it is true. Like, the public is very much with the Democrats on this right now, and they have not been able to bring this to a resolution.
Speaking of which, we do have the State of the Union next week. I know you will be watching it. I'll be watching it. Not everybody else is going to be watching it. But what becomes interesting this year is the Democrats have decided to have their own alternate State of the Union. I guess Republicans have our alternate halftime show. Democrats are having their alternate State of the Union, the People's State of the Union, where at least a dozen House and Senate Democrats are planning to go. I think they're going to see that there's a real problem and try and counter-program the State of the Union. But Matt, what do you make of all this?
It's a really interesting sign of how much things have changed. When I was a Capitol Hill staffer, I only worked for swing state members of Congress. And during the State of the Union, one of the things I would have to do as the in-house policy expert was I would have to watch the State of the Union and prepare a response for media when my boss was going to get interviewed. And I would very carefully pick out, because these were swing districts, here are some things that we liked. Right. And here are some things that we didn't like. And that was the message that you needed to carry in swing districts. And now we're at this point where I can kind of see where the Democrats are coming from. What is the point of listening to the president just lie and hold a campaign rally for an hour and a half of unmitigated primetime bullshit? There's no point in being a prop for that exercise. That's really sad, because this is a constitutional function of the president of the United States. Right. The one thing I will say to your previous point about Democrats not being particularly well coordinated is that their response of having little different placards that they were holding up with like 15 different messages was so slapdash and uncoordinated last time that it was like a self-owned step on a rake. Democrats, if you're going to do something, do it together or don't do it at all.
Right. The color coordination was always fun too. Look, I think it's time just to get rid of the State of the Union, the constitutionally mandated duty. So we need to have something, but this is just a shit show political event that happens every single year. And it serves almost no purpose. And it's all theatrics. It doesn't inform. It doesn't talk about anything. It's just lies, lies, lies. We look at this stuff from such a partisan view now. And Republicans just look like idiots as well when they're doing their things with Biden or Obama. It's just time for this thing to go and come up with a better alternative, because at the end of the day, we should not be giving airtime in the building to do a campaign rally for one side or the other.
By the way, before we move to the next segment, let's do an extended web extra right here. We didn't prepare this. I think we should problem solve this right now. The State of the Union could be a written message to Congress. Thomas Jefferson did it that way, right? There's nothing in the Constitution that says you need to give a primetime teleprompter bullshit address. I would much rather see not one of these Battleship Potemkin Donald Trump cabinet meetings. I would like to see the President of the United States and congressional leaders from both parties sit down and have an honest, not particularly pre-scripted conversation where they disagree about some things, they agree about some things, kind of like what we do on this show.
Right.
That would tell us what the state of our union is. If our elected leaders could do that, then that would send the message that the state of our union is strong. As long as we can work through our differences that way, then our republic is working. It's not about our policy disagreements. It's about how we deal with our policy disagreements.
It's because what makes us work are the checks and balances, the ability for the co-equal branches to have these conversations. Let's put the president in the middle there and let's make him accountable to the questions that are going to be asked. It's okay to have disagreements, but there needs to be accountability. There needs to be that conversation. And I think one way to solve the State of the Union that could be interesting is to sort of make it much more interactive. Don't make it just this long, drawn-out speech. I think we could fix this thing, and I think it would be much more instructive to who we are as a country.
Right. To be clear, it would degenerate into each side giving their talking points and prefab zingers, kind of like presidential debates have. But I'm with you that we need to think beyond this primetime set piece. It was still recognizable. Even when it was George W., it was recognizable. It was political theater, you know, but there were still policy proposals. There was seriousness to it. Even when Joe Wilson was screaming, "You lie," at Barack Obama.
Right.
But the difficulty of the State of the Union now, and the Democrats deciding piecemeal to sort of boycott and give an alternative, is that it sends the message that the institution no longer works. And that is bad.
Well, exactly. And going back to Joe Wilson, don't forget the day after he called the president and apologized. Like, yes, he was out there and he yelled, "You lie," but he still stepped back and said, "Oh crap, like this is wrong. What I did was wrong," and apologized to the president of the United States. And we've lost that decorum. We've lost this understanding that we can have different views, but we're not enemies.
All right. Well, I have derailed us onto this like upbeat, positive exchange of ideas far too long. Let's get to something much more rancorous and downbeat. In all seriousness, we have to talk about the looming possibility of war with Iran in some form. Diplomacy, as of this hour, we're recording this on Thursday the 19th, is still underway, but the reporting suggests that we're about as close to a military conflict with Iran as we can be. We could be ready to strike at a moment's notice. By the time this airs, we might already be in a conflict.
This one's interesting. This is truly a big stick diplomacy. We're sending a message to Iran. We're here. And if you don't come to something, and he even said it at the Board of Peace, you know, either way is going to be good for him. As a Republican who's not a fan of Trump, I certainly have my questions. But what I find also interesting here is I don't necessarily even have a problem, though, because Iran is destabilizing. We can't let them have nuclear weapons. We need to be there to defend our allies like Israel and other Middle Eastern countries. There's a big part of me as a Republican who feels like we have a responsibility in the world to protect our allies, to try to preserve peace as being the biggest, strongest power that's out there, and that Iran is a threat. And if we can get them to an agreement by putting military outside of it, it's probably good. Now, it's also a political question. Many in the MAGA base hate this. Marjorie Taylor Greene was already out today saying this thing is horrible. But what I'd be curious about is, does this bring back those more traditional Republicans that do feel like we have that responsibility? And so this one's kind of a mixed bag for me.
Right. I agree that it's not straightforward from a policy standpoint, and people inside the administration are privy to far more information than you and I have. But the whole point is that the Constitution requires Congress to declare war for a reason. And
exactly.
I'm a constitutional purist in this regard, at least. You know, there's supposed to be consultation. This is supposed to be a function of the republic that the people's elected representatives can weigh in on. Even FDR, when we engaged in military activity that wasn't even a declaration of war around the Lend-Lease program, went on the air to explain it to the American people and get the American people's tacit backing and then formal backing when we actually declared war through Congress. That's what should happen here.
Yeah, in America, how we do things is equally important as what we do. You do need congressional approval on this. And one of the biggest disagreements I've had with Trump on so many things is just how he approaches this and how we are deploying military into the region to start a war without congressional approval. It is, honestly, it's an impeachable offense. It'll never happen, but it's wrong.
Well, with that, let's shut down the rundown and get to our deep dive of the week.
Let's go on a deep dive.
This week, there was a major inside confab among Republicans talking about the midterm strategy and trying to get the entire party aligned on the same page. Matt, my understanding is you weren't in the room for that, but you were room adjacent. You are very wired in to lots of people who are inside that room. So I was hoping you could take all of us through an inside view of what went down, what was said, and how you appraise it.
So earlier this week at the Capitol Hill Club, it's right next to the Republican National Committee. It's where we all get together with not being around prying eyes, if you will, and can kind of talk freely.
Masks with a piano player. Oh, no, wait, that's Eyes Wide Shut. Go on.
I was going to say, isn't that the Democrat one? I mean, you guys can still smoke over there.
Dude, what we get together and do in our own time is not that exciting. I promise you.
But it was interesting. It was led by Susie Wiles, and it had pollster Tony Fabrizio. And Tony is...
He's the president's pollster.
Been a longtime president's pollster. He is one of the smartest guys out there. I've worked with Tony in a couple races. I cannot say enough good things about how smart he is and how plugged in he is and how well he understands the electorate. Some of the things he talked about, things that break through are banning stock trades for Congress, transparency on health insurance data, lowering prescription drugs, tax cuts. Affordability is a huge issue. He mentioned that closing the borders doesn't resonate much with with the voters. Men, moderates, true independents, Hispanics are the true persuadable voters. It was also interesting. He talked about paid media should go on targeted media, not necessarily broadcast or cable, that Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, these are all great places to sort of go. And what was interesting here is leading into the State of the Union, the president doesn't necessarily listen to data. The president is not necessarily disciplined with the messaging. It's kind of like clean up on aisle 9. Trump broke something again. And so it was the first, what will be many, as far as how to navigate the rough waters of what's coming in 2026.
I've been on the other end of this in 2010 when it was Democrats with an incumbent president with sagging approval ratings. And I had a boss who was running for a major office in a tough cycle for my party. This sounds an awful lot to me like the kind of guidance we were getting from pollsters in that cycle when everyone felt bad about the economy. Even though we could point to some macroeconomic signs that it was recovering and things were getting better, people did not feel it. They didn't buy it. So what we got was a lot of messaging guidance to not try to claim that things were better, but to basically say, well, look, we feel your pain. There are some positives going on. We have a lot more work to do. And by the way, the other guys are terrible. And that's really all you can do under these circumstances. It is battlefield triage. You are just trying to limit, not stop, limit the bleeding from your side. And the problem for Republicans is that we now have 2 midterm elections worth of evidence to draw on. The one where he was on the ballot was an absolute wave blowout against Republicans. The other was a significant underperformance for Republicans when Trump wasn't on the ballot there to fire up the Republican base. As of today, Trump's approval rating is so low that Gallup decided to stop measuring it after 8 years. They just gave up on it because they're like, this is going to just fucking offend this guy. Like, we don't need this smoke. And the generic ballot, when you ask, do you generally want a Democrat or a Republican to represent you, is plus 5.5 points for Democrats. Now, in the 2018 midterms that turned into a blowout on the eve of the election, it was somewhere between 7 and 8 points plus for Democrats. So it's really beginning to creep into that kind of absolute wave territory. The only thing that I think is saving Republicans right now is the fact that there are fewer swing seats up for grabs. And I think that's going to limit how many seats Republicans can win in both the House and the Senate and in state races. But make no mistake, this kind of messaging guidance, it's just about putting on gauze and tourniquets and just trying to stop the worst of the worst damage. I don't think any of this messaging guidance is going to save Republicans.
You're right. It is battlefield triage. But I think what's encouraging from my perspective is it's kind of the first time this year that we've had these conversations, because what you see in public is we have the greatest economy in the world, the golden age of America. We've solved 8 world wars. We've done this, we've done that. And it's all just blowing smoke up people's asses. It does sort of signal to me kind of a break from the fantasy world that we see on TV with Trump. Look, we are going to lose the House. It is going to be ugly. The Senate as I said earlier, is going to be close. But think about it from this perspective. Republicans don't have to lose the Senate to lose. Right now, we have 3 votes, and we have Collins, Murkowski, and Paul that are often at odds with what this administration does. If Democrats pick up Collins and it's Murkowski and Rand Paul, we're kind of a 1-vote swing on things that matter.
I think people like you are in a very difficult position because what you're trying to do is remake the Republican Party on the fly without losing. You don't want to clean house. You want to sort of cut away the diseased stuff and rebuild with healthy stuff. I don't know that you can do that. And the reason I don't think you can do that is that Democrats just went through a crushing loss in 2024, and we didn't really look ourselves in the mirror either. We actually did a post-mortem review, and Ken Martin decided to throw it out, like sweep it under the rug. I'd like to say that Republicans need that kind of a drubbing in order to look yourself in the face and say, like, holy shit, what have we done?
Right.
Like, we've empowered a psychopath at the lead of our party. This is not who we are. I don't even know that that would do it. And you've kind of set yourself up with the harder task of not doing that, trying to get rid of the Trump MAGA influence and rebuild with kind of like vestigial Republican DNA. I don't know that you're going to be able to pull that one off either.
We are on the Titanic, but we don't think we are. So, and that's the problem we're running into is we know for those of us here, we can see the iceberg coming, but those steering the ship just think, it's nothing.
Well, with that, let's get to the previously threatened, promised. That's bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Bullshit.
A bullshit?
You probably already heard something about the story involving Stephen Colbert and FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr.
CBS blocked him from airing an interview on the broadcast with a vocal critic of President Trump and his policies.
This is supposedly about an obscure rule that the FCC has maintained for decades.
Colbert was told the interview could violate the so-called equal time rule, which mandates that all political candidates receive equal on-air opportunities.
But there are so many layers of bullshit happening here that once you rake them all away, it becomes crystal clear that this is another instance of the president using straight-up mafia tactics to target political opponents while big corporations fall all over themselves to suck up. First of all, this nonsense about the equal time rule is a huge reach. It's true that it's been around for almost 100 years.
It originated with the Radio Act of 1927, which requires all networks and radio stations to give equal time to all political candidates.
But for 20 years now, talk shows have been exempt by law.
Late night shows like this don't have to follow the equal time rule.
And has anything changed about that law?
It still is the case, technically. The law hasn't changed.
The only thing that's changed is the Trump administration saying they were going to go after speech that they didn't like.
FCC Chairman Brendan Carr released a letter saying that could change.
Which, of course, Stephen Colbert saw right through.
Carr said he was thinking about dropping the exception for talk shows because he said some of them were motivated by partisan purposes. Well, sir, you're chairman of the FCC, so FCCU. Because I think you are motivated by partisan purposes.
Of course, remember the whole equal time law comes from the Radio Act of 1927. Guess what they're not going after? Radio. And guess which side's political views dominate radio? At least 15 million Americans tune into one of the top 15 talk radio programs every week, with almost all of them being right-wing. That's 5 times more than the number of viewers who tune in to Stephen Colbert. And of course, the whole thing is even more ridiculous because more Americans watch late night shows through clips on YouTube than watch on TV, and the FCC doesn't regulate YouTube. What's really extra insane about this is that CBS is so obviously sucking up here. Legal experts say that even if the FCC said that the Colbert Show violated the equal time rule, the enforcement would be minimal, a small fine at most, which shows that this really is about the fact that
Paramount, CBS's parent company, is back in the mix to potentially purchase Warner Brothers Discovery. And the Trump administration would have to approve that merger.
the real and obvious story here is that the Trump administration is making up the law to go after anyone who criticizes them, and CBS is playing right into the corruption. And anyone who tries to tell you any different is trying to FCC with your head. All right, and with that, let's get to this week's Dose of Hope.
My dose of hope comes from the golfing world, and it was spectacular. This past weekend, Anthony Kim won on the Live Golf Tour in Adelaide, Australia. It had been 5,795 days since he last won a professional golf tournament. And he didn't just win. He beat John Rahm and Bryson DeChambeau, two of the best players in the world. Now, if you're not a golf fan, you may not remember Anthony Kim. In the late 2000s, he was a rock star, big belt buckles, fearless swagger. In the 2008 at the Ryder Cup, Kim dismantled Sergio Garcia, a defining moment that helped deliver the United States its first Ryder Cup victory in nearly a decade. He was fearless. He was electric. He was the future. But then he disappeared. Rumors swirled. We found out later that it was injuries, addiction. He hit rock bottom. When he returned to professional golf, he wasn't even a contender. He was a question mark. He was relegated. He had to play his way back, earned his spot, and kept grinding. And then this Sunday happened. The crowd swarmed. People climbed trees to get a good look at him. It rivaled Tiger Woods' comeback in Augusta. And after he sank that final putt, his daughter raced onto the green and wrapped him in a big hug that said everything. But what struck me wasn't just the win. It was the grace. After losing, DeChambeau stood there with his hat in hand, waiting to congratulate him. Pure class. But it wasn't just Bryson. It was the entire field. Competitors who had every reason to be disappointed, they chose dignity instead. Then the golf world poured in support. It was about a man who fought his way back. Because redemption is an American story. You can fall. You can disappear. You can struggle, and then you can come back. That's not naivete. That's belief. The belief that your worst chapter doesn't have to be your final one. Anthony Kim didn't just win a golf tournament. He reminded us what second chances look like, why we root for a comeback, and why resilience still moves us. That's what the spirit of America is all about.
My dose of hope is a bookend to your earlier Trump dump. I want to talk about health. No, not the vigorously homoerotic softcore video that RFK Jr. just put out, which was practically an outtake from the volleyball scene in Top Gun. I'm talking about America actually becoming healthy again. And I want to give a hat tip here to the writer Derek Thompson for compiling these statistics and providing this graphic. In the past year, we've seen the largest decline in the U.S. murder rate ever recorded, huge declines in traffic fatalities and drug overdoses, a surprising and largely unreported decline in teen anxiety and despair, coinciding with ongoing declines in suicide. It's so easy for every topic to be overtaken by our knee-jerk lizard brain political reaction these days that it's sometimes hard to see good news for what it is. And I want to be crystal clear that these encouraging signs are not because of Donald Trump or RFK. As you can see in these graphs, all of these positive changes began several years ago when Joe Biden was president. And as for the MAHA movement and RFK Jr.'s Department of Health and Human Services in particular, it's actually swimming against this good news by eroding public health and decimating faith in proven vaccines, which is why cases of tuberculosis, meningococcal disease, and measles are all surging. But despite that, and despite Trump trying to take credit for things that he didn't do or cause or help the declining murder rate, it's a good sign that these positive developments are happening regardless of who is president. It means that there are deeper forces at work in our country and that political power, despite how important and depressing it is these days, isn't everything. There's a lot more to life, and apparently a lot of those things are going well right now. And on that very hopeful note, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.